When I first met Natalie, she was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner: radiant, ambitious, kind, and full of life. She had this magnetic energy about her that drew people in, myself included. Back then, I was just starting my career in the tech industry. My ambitions were big, but so were my doubts. Natalie believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. She saw the best in me and pushed me to see it too. We got married 3 years later, a small but elegant ceremony on the California coast. I had landed a lucrative deal for my startup, and our future seemed as bright as the sun setting over the ocean that day. The early years of our marriage were a dream. We traveled, dined at upscale restaurants, and enjoyed a lifestyle that felt straight out of a movie. Natalie thrived in that world. She loved planning vacations to Europe, shopping at boutique stores, and hosting dinner parties where she charmed everyone in the room. We were that couple everyone envied. Life was fast, fun, and full of possibilities. But as the years went by, the very career that had built our dream life started to take its toll. The startup wasn't so much a company as it was a demanding beast that consumed every waking moment of my life. Long hours turned into sleepless nights, and sleepless nights turned into weekends spent buried in emails and meetings. The spontaneity and laughter that defined our relationship started to fade. Natalie tried to be understanding at first. She'd bring me coffee during late-night work sessions, or text me reminders to eat when she knew I was skipping meals. But over time, her patience started to wane. Who could blame her? I wasn't the same husband she married. I was always distracted, always busy. Our conversations became surface level, and our date nights became fewer and far between. Looking back, I can pinpoint the moment when things started to shift. It wasn't a big, dramatic event. It was small, a subtle but noticeable change in Natalie's demeanor. She stopped waiting up for me when I worked late. She stopped asking me about my day. It was as if a quiet distance had crept into our marriage, one neither of us wanted to address. Then, one evening, Natalie dropped a casual comment that would unknowingly set the stage for everything that followed. "I think I want to join a gym," she said over dinner, her tone light and nonchalant. "I've been feeling like I need to do something for myself, you know. Something to get me out of the house." "Sure," I replied, barely looking up from my phone. "Sounds like a good idea. If only I had known then what that decision would lead to." At first, Natalie's decision to join a gym seemed harmless, even healthy. She had always been an active person, but the past couple of years, our lifestyle had become more about indulgence than balance. Between the wine tastings, gourmet meals, and countless lazy Sundays spent binge-watching shows, it made sense that she'd want to shake things up. She signed up at a local fitness club, one of those high-end places with sleek equipment, eucalyptus-scented towels, and juice bars that charged $10 for a protein shake. I barely had time to notice, honestly. My work schedule was relentless, and the little free time I had was often spent trying to decompress from the pressure. Natalie, however, dove headfirst into her new routine. It started with a few evening sessions a week. She'd come home afterward glowing, not just from the workout but from what seemed like a newfound sense of purpose. She'd excitedly tell me about a new exercise she'd learned or how invigorated she felt after a class. I nodded along, happy that she was happy, even if I wasn't fully present in those conversations. Her enthusiasm grew quickly. Evening sessions turned into mornings and evenings. Then came the talk of personal training sessions. "Babe," she said one night as we sat on the couch, her legs tucked under her, "I think I want to work with a trainer. There's this guy at the gym, Aiden. He's amazing. Super knowledgeable, and he's helped a lot of people see real results." I glanced up from my laptop, where I was half listening and half answering emails. "Sure, sounds great," I said, not giving it much thought. Looking back, I wish I'd paid more attention to how animated she seemed whenever she talked about Aiden. At the time, it didn't strike me as odd. Natalie was naturally bubbly, and she always threw herself wholeheartedly into new hobbies. If this gym thing made her happy, who was I to stand in the way? Over the next few weeks, her schedule became almost entirely gym-centered. She started waking up at 5 a.m. for sunrise workouts, a drastic shift for someone who used to hate mornings. She'd spend hours there on weekends, sometimes coming home later than I expected. I remember teasing her one Saturday when she came through the door, flushed and energized. "You're practically living at that gym now. Should I be jealous of the weights?" She laughed, brushing it off. "Hardly. It just feels so good to finally do something for myself, you know. You've got your work, this is my thing." And that made sense. I did have my work. Too much of it, if I'm being honest. Natalie deserved to have her own space, her own passion. But even as I told myself that, I couldn't help but feel a tiny sliver of unease. It wasn't just the time she spent there. It was the way she'd talk about it, especially about her trainer, Aiden. "He's so motivating," she'd say, her eyes lighting up. "He really pushes me, but in a good way. I've already seen so much progress. I didn't think I could ever feel this strong." I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid or insecure. After all, Natalie wasn't doing anything wrong. She was simply excited about her workouts. But that sliver of unease, it lingered. And soon, it would grow into something much harder to ignore. As the weeks went by, Natalie's gym obsession became a fixture of her daily routine, and I tried to see it as a positive change. She was happier, more energetic, and, frankly, looking incredible. Her newfound confidence was magnetic, and I was proud of her dedication. But it was hard to ignore the little things that started to feel off. For starters, she talked about Aiden constantly. Every conversation about the gym seemed to include his name. "Aiden says I'm improving my form," or "Aiden suggested I try this new protein shake." It wasn't just his advice she seemed enthralled by, either, it was him. She'd go on about how encouraging he was, how he made her believe in herself, how he was so dedicated to his clients. At first, I chalked it up to admiration. He was her trainer, after all. It made sense for her to respect him and value his guidance. But as time went on, the frequency of his mentions, and the way her face lit up when she talked about him, began to gnaw at me. Then there was her phone. Natalie had never been secretive with her phone before. We'd always had an open and trusting relationship. But now, she seemed glued to it, constantly texting or scrolling, and she'd quickly put it down or turn it face down when I entered the room. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it was hard to ignore the growing pit in my stomach. I told myself it was work-related or maybe just her chatting with friends. Still, it nagged at me. One evening, I got home earlier than usual, a rare occurrence these days. Natalie wasn't in the living room or the kitchen, so I headed upstairs. As I passed our bedroom, I heard her voice, muffled and cheerful. She was on the phone, her tone light and playful. I couldn't make out much, but I caught snippets of laughter and the unmistakable sound of her saying, "You're such a goof." When I entered the room, she startled, her phone slipping from her hand. "Oh, hey," she said, her voice a little too bright. "You're home early." "Yeah, thought I'd surprise you," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Who were you talking to?" Her eyes darted to her phone before she quickly picked it up and pressed it to her chest. "Just one of the girls from the gym," she said, brushing past me toward the closet. "We were planning a group workout for Saturday." It was a plausible explanation, but her reaction didn't sit right with me. Natalie wasn't the type to get flustered or evasive, yet here she was, acting like she'd been caught doing something wrong. I didn't push it. Maybe I should have. Instead, I let it slide, convincing myself that I was overthinking things. But the unease stayed with me, growing stronger with every passing day. It wasn't long before I started to notice other things. Natalie had always been a low-maintenance kind of woman, beautiful without even trying, but now, she was putting more effort into her appearance. She bought new workout gear, form-fitting leggings and stylish tops that she didn't seem to wear anywhere but the gym. She started wearing perfume before her sessions, something she'd never done before. "Why are you all dressed up just to sweat it out at the gym?" I joked one morning as she was tying her sneakers. She shrugged, her tone breezy. "I just like feeling put together. It motivates me." Again, it was a reasonable answer. But paired with everything else, it left me feeling unsettled. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was projecting my own insecurities onto her. After all, I wasn't exactly the attentive husband these days. Maybe this was my fault, and Natalie was just trying to fill a void I hadn't been able to. Still, that gnawing feeling in my gut refused to go away. And soon, it would become impossible to ignore. One Friday evening, I decided to stop by the gym on my way home from work. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision. Natalie had mentioned earlier that she'd be there for her usual session with Aiden, and I thought it might be nice to surprise her. Maybe we could grab dinner afterward, something we hadn't done in ages. When I walked into the gym, the first thing that struck me was how different her world here seemed from the one we shared at home. The place was buzzing with energy, rows of treadmills, clinking weights, and groups of people chatting between sets. It felt vibrant, almost intoxicating, and I could see why Natalie enjoyed spending so much time here. I spotted her easily. She was in the corner by the free weights, her back to me, doing squats while Aiden stood nearby, coaching her form. Aiden. He was younger than I'd imagined, late 20s, maybe. Tall, muscular, and exuding a kind of effortless confidence. He was the kind of guy who probably turned heads everywhere he went, and judging by the way Natalie was laughing at something he'd said, he knew it. For a moment, I just stood there, watching them. There was nothing overtly inappropriate about their interaction. Aiden was correcting her posture, his hands lightly guiding her shoulders, and Natalie seemed genuinely focused on her workout. But something about the way they moved together, the easy familiarity between them, made my stomach twist. I walked over, plastering on a smile to mask my unease. "Hey, stranger," I said, my voice deliberately casual. Natalie turned, her eyes widening in surprise. "Oh. What are you doing here?" "Thought I'd pick you up for dinner," I replied, glancing briefly at Aiden, who gave me a polite nod. "Hi," he said, extending a hand. "You must be Natalie's husband." "I'm Aiden." His grip was firm, his smile disarming. I shook his hand, forcing myself to return the gesture. "That's me," I said, keeping my tone even. "Nice to meet you." Natalie seemed flustered, which struck me as odd. She wasn't usually the type to get thrown off kilter. "I'm almost done," she said quickly, glancing at Aiden. "Just one more set, right?" "Yep, and then you're free," Aiden said with a grin, stepping back to give her space. I watched as she finished her last set, my unease growing with every passing second. Aiden stayed nearby, offering words of encouragement, and I couldn't help but notice how much effort Natalie was putting into impressing him. She worked harder than I'd seen her work at anything in years. When she was done, she grabbed her towel and flashed Aiden a bright smile. "Thanks, Aiden. See you Monday." "Great work today," he replied, his voice warm. "You're making amazing progress." On the drive to the restaurant, Natalie was unusually chatty, going on about her workout and how much she'd improved. I listened, nodding at all the right moments, but my mind was elsewhere. The way she'd looked at Aiden, the way her face had lit up when he complimented her, it wasn't something I could brush off. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. Aiden was just her trainer, and Natalie was allowed to have her own life, her own hobbies. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. And soon, I'd find out just how right I was. The unease I felt after seeing Natalie and Aiden together didn't go away, it festered. For the next week, I found myself hyper-aware of everything Natalie said and did. The way she smiled at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, the sudden increase in her gym visits, the way she avoided eye contact when I asked how her workouts were going. I hated feeling this way, suspicious, paranoid. It wasn't who I was. But something about the situation felt wrong, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. One evening, while Natalie was in the shower after yet another late night at the gym, I found myself standing in our bedroom, staring at her phone. It was sitting on the nightstand, unlocked. She must have forgotten to lock it when she set it down. I hesitated. This wasn't me. I wasn't the kind of husband who went snooping through his wife's private messages. But the knot in my stomach was too tight to ignore. Before I could talk myself out of it, I picked up her phone and opened her messages. At first, everything seemed normal: chats with her mom, a group thread with her gym friends, texts from work. But then I saw it. A conversation with someone saved as Aiden, trainer. I tapped on the thread, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. The messages were friendly. Too friendly. Aiden, you absolutely crushed it today. Seriously, you're amazing. Natalie, thanks. Couldn't do it without you. Smiling face with smiling eyes. Aiden, don't sell yourself short. You're a natural. My grip tightened on the phone as I scrolled further. The messages grew increasingly personal. There were inside jokes, playful banter, and what felt like a subtle flirtation woven through their words. Aiden, I've gotta say, you're the highlight of my day. I always look forward to our sessions. Natalie, you're too sweet. You make it so easy to enjoy working out. My chest tightened. I kept scrolling, desperate for context, for something that would make this all seem innocent. But then I saw a message that stopped me cold. Aiden, maybe one of these days, we should grab a coffee or something. You know, outside the gym. Natalie's response was a single emoji, the winking face. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My hands trembled as I set the phone back on the nightstand, trying to process what I'd just read. I didn't know what to think. Was this harmless flirting? A joke? Or was there something more going on? When Natalie came out of the shower, towel drying her hair, I forced myself to act normal. But inside, I was a storm of anger, confusion, and hurt. For the rest of the night, I replayed those messages over and over in my mind, dissecting every word, every emoji, searching for meaning. I didn't confront her, at least, not yet. Instead, I decided to wait, to see if there was more to this than what I'd found. Part of me hoped I was overreacting, that it was nothing. But deep down, I feared the worst. And soon, I'd have proof that my fears were justified. The following week, I couldn't focus on anything but Natalie and her trainer. Every text notification she received made my stomach churn. Every time she left for the gym, I felt a rising sense of dread. I was trapped in my own head, battling between wanting to trust her and fearing that trust was misplaced. That Friday, I came home earlier than usual again. Natalie had mentioned earlier that she'd be doing a late session at the gym with Aiden. I had planned to use the time to catch up on work, but instead, I found myself pacing the living room, my mind racing. Finally, I made a decision. I grabbed my keys and headed to the gym. When I arrived, the parking lot was mostly empty. I sat in my car for a few minutes, trying to convince myself I was being ridiculous, that I was just going to confirm she was working out and go home. But the gnawing pit in my stomach told me otherwise. I stepped inside and scanned the room. At first, I didn't see her. The main workout area was sparsely populated, and Natalie wasn't among the people jogging on treadmills or lifting weights. I checked the group class schedule on the wall, nothing matched what she'd mentioned earlier. That's when I noticed a set of glass doors leading to a private training room at the far end of the gym. The lights were dim, but the faint sound of laughter drifted through the cracks. My chest tightened as I approached the doors. Peering through the small window, I saw them. Natalie and Aidan were alone in the room. She was seated on a bench, laughing at something he'd said, while he stood close, too close. His hand was on her shoulder, and her body language was relaxed, almost intimate. It wasn't the kind of closeness you'd expect between a trainer and a client. I felt frozen, my mind reeling. Was this all it was? A moment of unprofessional familiarity? Or was there more? As if on cue, Aidan leaned in, whispering something into her ear. Whatever he said made Natalie laugh again, her hand briefly touching his arm in a way that sent a wave of nausea through me. I couldn't watch anymore. I pushed the door open, the sound of it hitting the wall making them both jump. "Natalie," I said, my voice tight and barely controlled. "What's going on here?" Her face went pale, her laughter dying instantly. "James," she stammered, standing up. "What are you doing here?" Aidan stepped back, his expression shifting from surprise to something resembling guilt. "Hey, man," he said, raising his hands defensively. "We were just wrapping up a session." I ignored him, my focus locked on Natalie. "This is what you call working out?" I asked, my voice louder than I intended. "Laughing and whispering in a private room with your trainer?" "James, it's not what it looks like," she said quickly, her tone pleading. "What does it look like, Natalie?" I shot back, my anger boiling over. "Because from where I'm standing, it sure doesn't look like just training." The tension in the room was suffocating. Aidan muttered something about giving us space and slipped out, leaving Natalie and me alone. She crossed her arms, her face a mix of guilt and frustration. "I can't believe you came here and embarrassed me like that." "Embarrassed you?" I said, incredulous. "Do you have any idea how this looks? How it feels to see my wife acting like this with another man?" She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's not what you think. Aidan's just a friend. He's been helping me feel better about myself, that's all." "Helping you feel better?" I repeated, my voice heavy with disbelief. "By whispering in your ear and laughing like you're on a date?" "I don't have to explain myself to you," she snapped, her defensive tone cutting through me. I stared at her, searching for any sign of remorse, any indication that she understood how much this hurt. But instead, I saw defiance, as if I were the one in the wrong. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the gym, the sound of the door slamming behind me echoing in my ears. That night, I slept on the couch, the weight of everything pressing down on me like a lead blanket. The cracks in our marriage, once small and manageable, now felt like an unbridgeable chasm. And I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up on the couch, my neck stiff and my mind still clouded with anger and confusion. Natalie wasn't in the kitchen or the living room, and I assumed she was upstairs, either sleeping or avoiding me. I didn't bother checking. I needed space to think. The events at the gym played on a loop in my head. Her laughter, his closeness, the defensive tone in her voice, it all felt like a betrayal, even if no physical lines had been crossed. Or had they? The doubt gnawed at me, each possibility worse than the last. By mid-morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I needed to know if my suspicions were justified or if I was destroying my marriage with baseless paranoia. I left the house and drove to the gym. Part of me hoped I'd find nothing, that Natalie was right and it was all just a misunderstanding. But another part of me was bracing for the worst. When I arrived, the gym was relatively quiet, with only a handful of cars in the parking lot. I spotted Aidan's truck immediately, parked in the same spot as the night before. I stepped inside, scanning the room. Natalie wasn't in the main area, but Aidan was, standing near the front desk, chatting with one of the receptionists. My chest tightened at the sight of him, but I forced myself to keep a level head. As casually as I could, I approached the front desk. Aidan noticed me immediately, his friendly demeanor slipping for a brief moment before he recovered. "Hey," he said, his tone cautious. "What brings you here?" "I'm looking for Natalie," I replied, my voice even. "She left early this morning and didn't say where she was going." Aiden hesitated, his gaze flickering toward the receptionist before returning to me. "She's not here," he said quickly. "She mentioned she might skip today." His answer felt rehearsed, too smooth to be genuine. The receptionist looked away, suddenly very interested in her computer screen. "Right," I said, my suspicion deepening. "Thanks." I turned and walked back to the parking lot, but I didn't leave. Instead, I parked a short distance away, far enough that my car wouldn't be immediately noticeable but close enough to keep an eye on the gym's entrance. An hour passed. Then another. Just as I was beginning to think I was wasting my time, I saw them. Natalie and Aiden walked out together, laughing and talking, their body language relaxed and familiar. She wasn't dressed for a workout, no leggings or tank top, just jeans and a casual blouse. Aiden had a gym bag slung over his shoulder, but he didn't seem to be in a hurry to leave. They got into Aiden's truck, and my heart sank. I waited until they pulled out of the parking lot before starting my car and following at a safe distance. They drove to a nearby coffee shop, one of those trendy places with outdoor seating and overpriced lattes. I parked across the street, watching as they grabbed a table on the patio. Natalie leaned in as Aiden spoke, her expression attentive and engaged. He reached across the table at one point, his hand brushing hers briefly, and she didn't pull away. I felt like I was being stabbed in the chest. This wasn't just friendly banter or professional camaraderie. This was something more. I stayed in my car, paralyzed by the weight of what I was seeing. I wanted to storm over there, to demand answers, but I couldn't bring myself to move. After what felt like an eternity, they got up and left, driving off together. I didn't follow this time. I didn't need to. I had seen enough to confirm what I had been dreading. When I finally drove home, I felt numb. The truth was out there now, undeniable and gut-wrenching. Natalie wasn't just spending time with Aiden, she was choosing him. That night, when she came home, I was waiting for her. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. Her face fell, a flicker of guilt crossing her features. "James, Don't," I interrupted. "Don't lie to me. I saw you with him today. I followed you to the coffee shop. So just tell me the truth. Are you sleeping with him?" She hesitated for a moment too long, and that hesitation was answer enough. Tears filled her eyes as she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not like that. It's not serious." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. "Not serious?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You betrayed me, Natalie. You lied to me, and you chose him over me. How is that not serious?" She broke down then, sobbing and apologizing, but her words felt hollow. Nothing she said could undo what had been done. That night, for the first time in our marriage, I realized I might not be able to forgive her. After Natalie admitted to the affair, everything seemed to blur into a haze of anger, heartbreak, and disbelief. Her words, "It's not serious," replayed in my mind like a broken record. What did that even mean? Did she think her betrayal didn't matter because it wasn't some grand love story? I wanted to scream, cry, break something, anything to release the storm building inside me, but instead, I sat in silence, staring at her as she cried and tried to explain herself. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, her voice trembling. "I was just lonely. You've been so busy with work, and I felt like you didn't see me anymore." Her words stung because they carried a kernel of truth. I had been distant, consumed by my career, and maybe I hadn't given her the attention she needed. But how did that justify what she did? "So this is my fault?" I asked, my voice low but shaking with emotion. "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "It's not your fault. It's mine. I made a terrible mistake, and I hate myself for it. I never wanted to hurt you. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the tense silence. You didn't want to hurt me. Then what did you think would happen when you started sneaking around with your trainer? I don't know, she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I wasn't thinking. I felt good when I was with him. He made me feel wanted, like I mattered. And I know that's awful, but I'm trying to be honest with you. Her honesty was like salt in an open wound. I had always thought we had a solid marriage, built on trust and love, but now it felt like everything was crumbling around me. You didn't just hurt me, Natalie, I said, my voice cracking. You broke something I don't know how to fix. How am I supposed to trust you after this? How do we come back from this? She reached for me then, her hands trembling, but I pulled away. I couldn't let her touch me, not after what I'd seen, what I knew. I want to fix this, she said, her eyes pleading. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll cut all contact with Aiden, I'll go to counseling, anything. Just tell me what to do. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could somehow rebuild what we had, that this was just a horrible mistake and not the end of everything. But the pain was too fresh, the betrayal too raw. I need time, I said finally, my voice hollow. I can't make any decisions right now. She nodded, her tears flowing freely. Take all the time you need. I'll wait. I'll prove to you that I'm still the woman you fell in love with. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder if the woman I had fallen in love with was gone forever. I stayed awake for hours, replaying the events of the day, the weeks leading up to it, and every moment that now seemed tainted by her actions. The gym sessions, the laughter, the texts, they all felt like pieces of a puzzle I had been too blind to see until it was too late. The hardest part wasn't realizing that Natalie had betrayed me. It was realizing that despite everything, I still loved her. And I hated myself for it. What did that say about me? About us? I had no answers, only an aching void where my trust used to be. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Natalie and I lived in a tense limbo, sharing the same space but feeling miles apart. She tried to make amends in every way she could, cooking my favorite meals, apologizing repeatedly, giving me space when I needed it. But none of it seemed to reach me. I was numb, consumed by a mix of anger, sadness, and the overwhelming question of whether our marriage could survive this. True to her word, Natalie cut off contact with Aiden. She cancelled her gym membership and even blocked his number in front of me as a gesture of sincerity. I'm done with him, she said. He means nothing to me. You're the one I want. I wanted to believe her, but the trust that had been the foundation of our marriage felt irreparably shattered. I couldn't shake the image of them together, the easy laughter, the intimate closeness. It haunted me, day and night. Despite my doubts, I agreed to try counseling. Natalie was adamant about it, and I figured it was the least I could do if there was any hope of salvaging what we had. Our first session was uncomfortable, to say the least. Sitting across from a stranger and airing out the most painful parts of our relationship felt like peeling back layers of skin to expose raw wounds. I felt invisible, Natalie admitted, her voice trembling. James, I love you, but for so long, I felt like I was just there. Like I didn't matter anymore. And I know that doesn't excuse what I did, but I need you to understand how lonely I was. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been so consumed by work, by providing for us, that I hadn't noticed how much I was neglecting her. It didn't justify her betrayal, but it did force me to confront my own role in the breakdown of our marriage. I never stopped loving you, I said, my voice tight with emotion. But I can't be the only one fighting for this. You chose someone else, Natalie. You broke us. How do I move past that? The counselor guided us through exercises to rebuild communication and trust, but every step felt like walking on broken glass. For every moment of progress, there were setbacks, arguments sparked by lingering resentment, silences that stretched too long. One night, after a particularly heated fight, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, staring at the wedding photo on the mantel. We looked so happy, so full of hope and love. It felt like a lifetime ago. Natalie came downstairs and sat beside me, her eyes red from crying. "I know you don't believe me right now," she said softly, "but I'm not giving up on us. I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you if that's what it takes." Her words stirred something in me, an ember of hope buried beneath the ashes of my anger and pain. I wasn't ready to forgive her, but I wasn't ready to walk away either. Over the next few weeks, we tried to rebuild. We started going on date nights again, rediscovering the parts of each other we had lost along the way. There were moments when I thought we might actually make it, small glimmers of the love we once had. But the shadow of her betrayal loomed over everything. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fully let go of the doubt, the fear that it could happen again. And then, just when I thought we were turning a corner, everything fell apart again. We decided to move to a new city, a fresh start, away from the gym, Aiden, and all the memories tied to her infidelity. It was a chance to leave the past behind and focus on rebuilding our future. For a while, it worked. The change of scenery brought a renewed sense of possibility. But as I would soon discover, no amount of distance could fix the deeper issues that had taken root in our marriage. Because Natalie's betrayal wasn't the end of the story, it was only the beginning. Moving to a new city felt like hitting the reset button on our lives. We rented a charming house in a quiet neighborhood, far from the reminders of Aiden, the gym, and the betrayal that had nearly broken us. For the first time in months, I felt a sliver of hope. Maybe this change was what we needed. Natalie seemed optimistic too. She threw herself into unpacking and decorating, eager to make the house feel like home. She talked about joining local community groups, taking up new hobbies, and starting fresh. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and for a brief moment, it felt like we were back on solid ground. But cracks began to form again, slowly and almost imperceptibly at first. A few weeks after the move, Natalie started going on morning jogs. At first, I didn't think much of it. Running had always been her way of clearing her head, and she seemed genuinely excited about exploring our new neighborhood. "Just getting some fresh air," she'd say with a smile, her cheeks flushed as she returned home, dripping with sweat. I wanted to believe it was as simple as that, but a familiar unease began to creep in. Her jogs became longer, stretching from 30 minutes to an hour, then more. She started coming home later, her explanations vague. One evening, as we sat on the couch, I casually asked about her routes. "Oh, I just jog wherever the mood takes me," she said, waving off the question. Something about her tone didn't sit right with me, but I didn't press. I wanted to trust her, to believe that the mistakes of the past were behind us. But then came the texts. It started with her phone buzzing more frequently. When I asked who it was, she'd shrug and say, "Just someone from the community group," or, "Oh, it's nothing." One morning, as she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I wasn't proud of it, but I picked it up. The message was from someone named Liam. "Liam, looking forward to our run tomorrow. Same time." My chest tightened as I stared at the screen. Who was Liam? Why hadn't she mentioned him? When she came out of the bathroom, I confronted her. "Who's Liam?" She froze, the color draining from her face. "He's just a guy I met while jogging," she said quickly. "He runs the same route, and we started chatting." "That's all?" "Just chatting?" I asked, my voice laced with suspicion. "Yes," she said, her tone defensive. "Why are you making this a big deal?" "He's just a friend." The word "friend" sent a shiver down my spine. I had heard it before, in the early days of her friendship with Aiden. "I'm not comfortable with this," I said firmly. "You running with some guy you barely know?" It doesn't feel right. She sighed, her frustration evident. James, I'm trying to move on from everything that happened. You said you wanted to trust me again, but how can I prove myself if you won't give me the chance? Her words left me conflicted. She was right, I had agreed to try to rebuild our trust. But how could I, when her actions kept reopening old wounds? The next day, she left for her morning jog as usual, and I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. Against my better judgment, I decided to follow her. I stayed far enough behind to avoid being noticed, watching as she ran through the neighborhood, her pace steady. Then, at a park near the edge of town, she stopped. A tall, athletic man jogged up to her, his smile wide as he greeted her. They exchanged a few words before setting off together, running side by side. I felt a surge of anger and betrayal. This wasn't some casual acquaintance or passing jogger, this was something more. I followed them for a while, my heart pounding with every step. They laughed, they talked, and the ease between them was unmistakable. By the time they parted ways and Natalie returned home, I was seething. That evening, I confronted her again. I followed you today, I said bluntly. Her eyes widened, a mix of shock and anger. You what? I saw you with Liam, I said, my voice steady but cold. You're not just chatting, Natalie. Don't lie to me. She hesitated, her expression shifting to guilt. We're just running together, she said quietly. I swear, that's all it is. Do you expect me to believe that? I snapped. After everything we've been through, you're doing this again. Her tears came quickly, but I couldn't tell if they were from remorse or frustration. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't think it would be a big deal. It is a big deal, I said, my anger boiling over. You're repeating the same patterns, Natalie. How am I supposed to trust you when you keep hiding things from me? She had no answer, and for the first time since her affair with Aidan, I realized that our fresh start might not have been enough to save us. Natalie promised me, once again, that there was nothing between her and Liam. She swore that they were just running buddies, nothing more. You're reading too much into it, she said, her voice tired and strained. I'm trying, James. I'm really trying. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that we were finally moving past the wreckage of her first betrayal. But the doubt lingered, gnawing at me every time her phone buzzed, every time she left the house for another jog. A few weeks passed, and I tried to let it go. I buried myself in work, hoping that if I gave her space and stopped obsessing, things might settle. But then, one evening, I came home earlier than usual and found the house empty. Natalie's car was in the driveway, but she was nowhere to be found. At first, I assumed she was out for a jog. But something felt off. Her running shoes weren't by the door, and her usual jogging gear was still in the laundry hamper. I checked the time, 6:30 p.m. Not exactly her usual jogging hour. As I stood in the kitchen, debating whether to call her, I noticed her phone sitting on the counter. Unlocked. It was as if the universe had handed me the opportunity to find the truth I'd been avoiding. My hands shook as I picked it up, scrolling through her messages. There it was. A text thread with Liam. Liam, still thinking about this morning. You looked amazing. Natalie, you're too sweet. I can't stop smiling. Liam, wish we had more time together. When can I see you again? Natalie, soon. I'll figure something out. My vision blurred as I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. This wasn't just casual banter. This wasn't just running together. This was an affair. Again. My body moved on autopilot as I left the house, got into my car, and started driving. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't sit there, stewing in my anger and heartbreak. Then, almost without thinking, I drove toward the park where I had seen them jogging together. My gut told me I'd find them there, and I was right. I spotted them near a secluded bench at the edge of the park. They weren't jogging, and they weren't just talking. Natalie was sitting close to Liam, her hand resting lightly on his knee. He leaned in, his face inches from hers, whispering something that made her smile. I couldn't take it. I got out of the car and marched toward them, my anger boiling over. Natalie! I shouted, my voice cutting through the evening air. She jumped, her face a mixture of shock and fear. Liam turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. What the hell is this? I demanded, my voice trembling with rage. James, she started, but I cut her off. Don't you dare try to explain this away, I snapped, pointing at Liam. This is exactly what I thought it was, isn't it? Liam stood, his hands raised defensively. Hey, man, let's calm down. Don't talk to me, I barked, my eyes fixed on Natalie. This is between me and my wife. She looked down, her face flushed with shame. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the tense silence. You didn't mean for it to happen. That's the same thing you said last time, Natalie. How many times am I supposed to hear that before I realize it's a lie? Liam took a step back, muttering something about giving us space, and disappeared down the path. I didn't care. He wasn't the issue, she was. I can't believe you, I said, my voice breaking. After everything we've been through, after everything I've done to try to save this marriage, you go and do this again? She started crying, but her tears didn't move me this time. I was too angry, too hurt to care. I thought we were fixing things, I said, my chest tight. I thought you wanted to rebuild what we had. But clearly, I was the only one trying. I'm sorry, she sobbed, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean to hurt you. I don't know what's wrong with me. I shook my head, the weight of her words crushing me. I can't do this anymore, Natalie. I can't keep forgiving you just to have you throw it all away again. Her tears flowed harder, but I turned and walked away, leaving her sitting there on the bench. For the first time since her affair with Aidan, I felt a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't about me. It was about her. And no amount of love or effort on my part could fix what she was so determined to break. When I got home that night, the house felt eerily quiet. Natalie didn't follow me. Part of me expected her to come rushing through the door, begging me to listen, pleading for another chance. But she didn't. Instead, I sat alone in the living room, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on me like a crushing force. The memories of our life together played like a cruel slideshow in my mind, our wedding day, the vacations, the laughter, the love. How had it all come to this? I stayed up late, staring at nothing, trying to sort through the tangled mess of emotions, the anger, the heartbreak, the disbelief. But one feeling stood out above the rest: exhaustion. I was tired of fighting for a marriage that only I seemed to care about saving. When Natalie finally came home, it was well past midnight. Her face was streaked with tears, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I stayed at the park, she said quietly, as if offering an explanation. I needed time to think. I didn't respond. What was there to say? She sat down across from me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I know I've ruined everything, she began, her voice trembling. I know you'll never be able to forgive me, and I don't blame you. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you, James. Even when I made these terrible choices, it was never because I didn't care about you. Her words felt hollow, like an echo of the apologies she'd made after her first betrayal. I wanted to believe her, but how could I? Love wasn't supposed to look like this, like lies and deceit and broken promises. I can't do this anymore, I said, my voice heavy with finality. She flinched as if I'd struck her. James, please, she whispered. Don't give up on us. I'll go to therapy, I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I shook my head, my resolve firm. You don't get it, Natalie. This isn't about fixing things anymore. You've crossed the line twice now. How am I supposed to trust you again? How am I supposed to believe anything you say? Her tears came harder, but I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. I gave you a second chance, I continued, my voice cracking. I put everything I had into rebuilding this marriage, and you threw it away. I can't keep sacrificing my sanity for someone who doesn't value what we have. She didn't respond, her sobs the only sound in the room. That night, I packed a bag and left the house. I didn't know where I was going, maybe a hotel, maybe to crash on a friend's couch. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there anymore. The walls of that house held too many memories, too much pain. As I drove aimlessly through the city, I felt a strange mix of emotions, sadness for what I was losing, anger at what she had done, and a flicker of relief that I was finally stepping away from the chaos. It wasn't an easy decision. I had loved Natalie with everything I had, and a part of me always would. But love wasn't enough anymore. Something had broken between us, something that couldn't be repaired. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that walking away wasn't giving up, it was saving myself. The first few weeks after leaving Natalie were a blur. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of the city, a far cry from the spacious house we'd shared. The walls were bare, the furniture sparse, but it felt like a clean slate, something I desperately needed. I kept myself busy to avoid sinking into the sadness that constantly lingered just below the surface. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into long hours, new projects, and anything that kept my mind occupied. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, the pain of losing her was always there, sharp and unrelenting. Every now and then, I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to text her, to share some mundane detail about my day or a memory that popped into my head. But then I'd stop, reminded of everything that had happened, and the ache would return. She called a few times, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. Her texts were a mix of apologies, pleas to talk, and updates on her life that I didn't ask for. I ignored them all. I wasn't ready to hear her voice, to reopen wounds that were still raw. Despite the distance I tried to maintain, I couldn't completely escape the aftermath of our breakup. Friends and family, who had once seen us as the perfect couple, started reaching out, asking what had happened. I gave them vague answers, not wanting to air our dirty laundry. She made mistakes, I'd say simply. We couldn't move past them. Most people respected my privacy, but a few pressed for details, their curiosity thinly veiled as concern. It only made the pain worse, forcing me to relive everything I was trying so hard to forget. As the weeks turned into months, I started to rebuild my life, piece by piece. I joined a gym, ironically enough, not because I wanted to relive Natalie's obsession but because I needed an outlet for the anger and frustration that still bubbled inside me. The physical exertion was cathartic, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over something. I also reconnected with old friends, people I had lost touch with during the years I spent consumed by work and my marriage. They welcomed me back with open arms, their support a reminder that I wasn't as alone as I felt. But as I worked to move forward, I couldn't help but think about Natalie. I wondered how she was coping, whether she was still with Liam or if their fling had fizzled out like a dying ember. I didn't want to know, but the questions lingered in the back of my mind, uninvited and persistent. Then, one evening, I ran into a mutual friend at a coffee shop. He seemed hesitant to bring up Natalie, but eventually, he did. "She's not doing great," he said, his voice low. "I think she's been struggling since you left." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me felt a flicker of satisfaction, a petty sense of vindication that she was facing consequences for her actions. But another part of me, one I wasn't proud of, still cared about her, still wanted her to be okay. "Did she say anything about me?" I asked, hating how desperate I sounded. "She regrets everything," he replied. She says losing you was the biggest mistake of her life. I nodded, unsure of what to say. Hearing that didn't bring me the closure I thought it would. If anything, it only deepened the ache I had been trying so hard to ignore. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized that moving on wasn't about waiting for the pain to disappear. It was about learning to live with it, to accept it as part of the journey. Natalie would always be a chapter in my life, one filled with love, heartbreak, and lessons I would carry with me forever. But she was no longer my future. And for the first time, I was okay with that. Time has a strange way of softening even the sharpest pain. Months turned into a year, and though the memories of Natalie and what we'd been through still lingered, they no longer consumed me. I focused on building a life that was mine and mine alone. Work was steady, and I even took on a few risks I'd been too hesitant to try before. Some paid off, some didn't, but the freedom to make those decisions without considering anyone else felt liberating. Therapy became a regular part of my routine. At first, I was skeptical. I didn't see how talking to a stranger about my feelings could make any of this better. But over time, it helped me unpack the layers of hurt, anger, and guilt I'd been carrying. I learned to stop blaming myself for Natalie's choices. Sure, I hadn't been a perfect husband, but her betrayals were hers to own. I also started dating again, cautiously at first. It was awkward, navigating the world of dating apps and first-date small talk after being married for so long. But each connection, even the ones that didn't go anywhere, reminded me that I was capable of love and being loved. One relationship stood out, a woman named Emily. She was kind, grounded, and refreshingly honest. On our third date, I told her everything about my marriage, about Natalie, and the infidelity that had broken us. I expected her to pull back, to see me as damaged goods. Instead, she looked me in the eye and said, "That must have been so hard. But I think it's amazing that you're still open to trying again." Her words stayed with me. For the first time, I felt like the weight of my past wasn't something I had to carry alone. Meanwhile, Natalie's life seemed to take a different turn. Mutual friends occasionally mentioned her in passing, and what I heard wasn't surprising. She had bounced from one relationship to another, each one seemingly more chaotic than the last. The stability she'd once had with me was gone, replaced by a string of temporary highs and inevitable disappointments. I didn't feel joy at her struggles. If anything, I felt pity. She was chasing something she couldn't seem to find, and I doubted she ever would until she confronted whatever was broken inside her. One day, out of the blue, she called me. It had been over a year since we'd last spoken, and hearing her voice was jarring. "Hey, James," she said softly. "I hope I'm not bothering you." I considered hanging up, but something in her tone stopped me. "What do you need, Natalie?" I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I know I've said it before, but I mean it. I was selfish, and I hurt you in ways I can never take back. I've had a lot of time to think, and I just needed you to know that." Her words were genuine, but they didn't carry the weight they once would have. I had already forgiven her, not for her sake, but for mine. "I appreciate that," I said simply. "I hope you're doing okay." "I'm trying," she replied. There was a pause, and then she added, "You deserved better than what I gave you, James. I hope you found it." I didn't tell her about Emily or the cautious optimism I felt about my future. Some things didn't need to be said. "Take care, Natalie," I said, ending the call. As I sat there, phone in hand, I realized that her apology, while sincere, wasn't what I needed to move on. I had already done that on my own. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Natalie had been a chapter in my story, a painful, transformative chapter, but she wasn't the ending. And that was enough. Looking back, my marriage to Natalie feels like a lifetime ago. It's strange how something that once defined you can eventually become a distant memory, a chapter in your story rather than the whole book. It took a long time to process everything that happened, the love, the betrayal, the heartbreak. But in the end, I came to realize that the pain taught me lessons I wouldn't trade for anything. The first lesson was about trust. Trust is fragile, easily shattered but difficult to rebuild. I learned that it's not just about the big moments, faithfulness, honesty, but also the small, consistent actions that show someone values and respects you. I also learned that once trust is broken, it can be rebuilt only if both people are fully committed to the process. Natalie wasn't, and that was why we couldn't make it work. The second lesson was about boundaries. I had ignored so many red flags early on, brushed them off as paranoia or insecurity, because I didn't want to face the truth. I convinced myself that love was enough to overlook the cracks in our relationship. It wasn't. Love needs respect, honesty, and accountability to survive. The most important lesson, though, was about myself. For so long, I had defined my worth by my ability to provide, to succeed, to keep things together. I thought that as long as I worked hard enough, I could fix anything. But relationships don't work that way. You can't love someone into being the person you need them to be. In the years since my divorce, I've rebuilt my life in ways I never thought possible. Emily and I are still together, and while we're taking things slow, I feel something with her that I hadn't felt in years, a sense of mutual respect and trust. It's not perfect, but it feels real, and that's more than I could have hoped for. Natalie and I haven't spoken since that phone call, and I think that's for the best. I wish her well, but I've let go of the part of me that still held on to the what-ifs of our marriage. She was a huge part of my life, and I'll always be grateful for the good times we shared. But I've learned that moving on doesn't mean forgetting, it means accepting and choosing to focus on the future instead of the past. If I could give one piece of advice to anyone going through something similar, it would be this: don't lose yourself trying to save something that can't be saved. Value yourself enough to walk away when you need to, and know that healing isn't about waiting for time to pass, it's about doing the hard work of understanding, forgiving, and letting go. Life goes on, even after heartbreak. And sometimes, the life you build after the pain is stronger and more fulfilling than you ever imagined. For me, that's been the greatest lesson of all.